That got me? Yeah, okay. So I'll probably move around. So if I want to talk to you, Karen, I'll just come back here. So um, I get, when I teach, I get a lot of like nervous energy, So Gerald just asked me to go how I was doing. I said I was jazzed. I always feel like that when I get started on teaching something. Um, so this week we are starting into a section of this class about wisdom. But this section of it, the rest of the time that we'll spend together, will be focused on the book of Ecclesiastes. I might also call it the talk or the speech of Ecclesiastes. At least one way to look at it as you read the text is it looks like it could have been a single speech given at some point. And I'll say a little bit more about that as we get into it. My job today, I have two things that I hope are going to happen. We'll see how it goes. I typed up notes, and usually it helps me if I behave myself and stick to my notes. I find it very difficult, but we'll try. But the first thing I want to do is talk some about the book as a whole, particularly in the context of the category that we call wisdom literature, and try to say some things about that. And then with that as kind of contact or background, we'll look at the first cluster of verses, first 12 verses of the book of Ecclesiastes, or the speech of Ecclesiastes. So that's the plan for today, 2 points. Maybe I can get through it. We'll see how it goes. So Ace has been in some of my classes on campus when I've had 2 pages of notes, and it took me 4 days to get through them. So we'll see. Yeah, we'll see. But let me pray for us, and we'll plunge into it. Father, thank you for your kindness to us. Thank you for bringing us together here. Thank you for the opportunity to study your word. We ask that you would grant us wisdom as we try to understand the kind of wisdom that you call us to. We ask your blessing on this time, and we pray these things in Jesus' name. So I am going to, like I said, try to stick to my notes for a little bit here, just to discipline myself to get through the material. Some introductory comments. It's important to interpret Ecclesiastes in a way that recognizes and clarifies the book's coherence with the rest of the Bible. Because of the translation of its key phrase as vanity of vanities, English-speaking interpreters have tended to understand emptiness or futility as the book's central idea. I'm drawing on an interpreter who makes a very strong case for translating the phrase breath of breath, a literal translation rather than a metaphorical translation. For unbelievers, of course, life can be futile, and it can seem futile even for believers. So we're trying to figure out how to think about this language that might suggest futility when we also recognize that the teaching of Scripture as a whole does not suggest that our lives as believers are futile. Okay, so we're looking for that middle ground. Something of the right tone is suggested by James 4, 13 through 15. I'm going to pause just a minute in case you want to look that up. But James 4, 13 through 15. James says, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go into such and such a town and spend a year there and trade and make a profit. Yet you do not know what tomorrow will bring. What is your life? For you are a mist that appears for a little time and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that." So a couple of things in that passage in James I want to point to. One is the statement that you are a mist, right? That's very close to the idea that's expressed with that word breath, usually translated vanity, in Ecclesiastes, right? So a mist, a breast, you are a mist. And then notice that what James says about this is not that we should regard life as pointless or hopeless, but rather of it, we should recognize that our life is subject to the sovereignty of God. So the passage, verse 15 says, instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live and do this or that. So the teaching here directs us to a humility that recognizes, yes, we can plan. Yes, we can do things in this life. But our doing of those things is in submission to the good providence of God. All right, so those are that's the way I want to try to approach what we find in Ecclesiastes. The Miss James mentions is like the breath in Ecclesiastes, as I said a minute ago. The central question of Ecclesiastes then might be expressed this way: everything under the sun, including your life and the work you do, is temporary. How will you live your life in light of that reality? Let me read it again. Everything under the sun, including your life and the work you do, is temporary. How will you live your life in light of that reality? Understood this way, Ecclesiastes is neither cynical nor skeptical, as some interpreters think of it, but coherent with the teaching of both the Old Testament and the New. Consider, for example, the juxtaposition of ideas throughout Psalm 90, and especially verses 10 through 12. I'm going to read verses 10 through 12 of Psalm 90, if you want to look. Psalm 90, verses 10 through 12. The years of our life are 70, or even by reason of strength, 80. Yet their span is but toil and trouble. They are soon gone, and we fly away. Who considers your anger and your wrath? So teach us to number our days, that we may get a heart of wisdom. So there again, we have that recognition, that reminder that our lives are brief, our lives are short, our lives are temporary, and that what we ought to do is number our days, recognize that temporary, get a heart of wisdom. Right? So this again, that's Psalm 90, but it's, I think, really consistent with what we'll discover as we go through Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes aims to teach us to number our while. The mean there is like that middle position, right? So this is the while in between other whiles, right? This is, and again, the idea of that word is, it's not going to last. We're not going to stay in our current circumstances forever. God has chosen to leave us here in the meanwhile. So, how ought we to live both now and here? So let me pause here and ask if you have any questions or comments with regard to what I've said so far. If I stick too closely to my notes, I start the monologue. Right? We don't want that. So, anything that's come up so far? All right, I'll ask you again from time to time, and so be thinking of things you'd like to pursue a little bit more. All right, so I've suggested that we understand vanity in Ecclesiastes with the literal translation of the word breath. So I want to ask a question: what does it mean to say that life is breath? That your life is a breath. Ecclesiastes highlights several things. One, life is short. Life is short. Two, opportunity is short. We miss doing the right thing. We have a chance to do something and we let it slip past. So opportunity is short. Third, memory is short. We forget things we ought to have learned already. We think we've learned them, we try to grasp them, as the book of Ecclesiastes puts it, there is nothing new under the sun. We should think about this also. It's easy for us to think about that culturally. I often have this experience when I'm listening to NPR, the morning news, morning edition, on my way up to campus. I've got the radio on in my truck, and I hear the news, and it goes through my mind that pretty much the same news program, pretty much the same sentences that I'm hearing are the same things I heard a year ago or 5 years ago. The stories, the kinds of things that happen, the particulars do change, of course, but the conclusions that are reached, the comments that are made, almost verbatim from a year ago or 5 years ago, and something of that is always the same is what Ecclesiastes points to, right? So that's history. And it happens not only kids, and I think, oh, they're going to be like me, and their attitudes towards me are going to be similar to my attitudes towards my father. And when we see repeatedly, if we're paying attention, that our lives fit into patterns that repeat themselves, and the way it has been is the way it will be, and so that predictability, in a sense, of what's going to happen is something that we experience on the personal level as well as the national or international level. So I've given you 4 suggestions about what Ecclesiastes means when it says life is like breath, life is short, opportunity short, memory short, history repeats itself. And as we go through the book, we'll see other ways to elaborate on human brevity of life, human finitude, and fallibility as we continue. So I said I'd pause again. Do you have questions or comments? Albert, please.
A comment, I guess, versus a question. I think it is helpful to think about the fact that my life is like I am to number our days. Like I'm thinking about that. Teach us to number our days, and that God is sovereign over my life, and it helps in thinking about like the big picture of my life.
Yeah.
But also like the very small things, and I was in a meeting this week at work, and like the person next to me was basically changing everything that we had spent a year talking about. And like I started feeling that frustration well up. But then the thought occurred to me, like, this is but a breath. Like, this is a moment in time that even like an hour, let alone like 7 days from now,
right,
I'll probably barely remember the experience. And it helped to calm me down in the moment and interact with that individual. And I'm thankful for the Lord's grace in that. But it's not, so the sum of it is it's not just the big macro picture, but even in the little moment by moment things, remembering that we are in the hands of our Creator, and these little things that happen shape us for something that's good, and it can calm the in the moment frustration of the bad thing happening.
Yeah. So that when I was an undergraduate, we had a history professor, and everybody took a history of civilization course. So it was a big lecture class, and about once a week, maybe it was every day. I don't remember. It's a long time ago now, but this professor would give a quiz. So everybody would take this quiz, and when he was ready to collect the quiz, he would say, he had this resonant bass voice. I can't quite imitate it, but he would say, "This too shall pass," and remind us that, this little thing, if we messed up on that quiz, didn't do well on it, okay, it's a little thing. It won't last. It won't endure. 30 years from now, you won't remember, any bit of it, right? And so, and I think that's the point that Albert's pointing to as well. It's just, our lives are like that, evanescent in many details. So, and as we continue, there's another example I have in mind mentioning later, and you may think of others that come into our conversation, and certainly jump in if you want to add those. So, any other comments or questions while we're paused? Yes?
Well, I know what Ecclesiastes is saying, and I know what you said about, like, your father and you and the attitude. But also, there's nothing new, but God can like I was thinking about Doug and his dad. There are many habits he has that are much like his dad's.
Yeah.
And he gets more like his dad as he gets older. And we've commented on that.
Albert has to look forward to.
But his father wasn't a believer.
Right.
And
Sure.
so because God is sovereign and he interjects something different, sometimes it can feel kind of hopeless when you read something like that or you think that way.
Right.
But actually but God. But God
Yes.
can change a heart.
Yep.
And so how Doug's 70, well, I don't know if your dad lived to 70. He didn't. He was dying in the 60s. But, but how Doug's dad looked and how Doug looks is very different.
Yeah.
So there's nothing new, but you're also not married. Like, when we were raising our kids, there was an expression that we used, and it was called breaking grapples bent being sin.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I had a problem with anger, like my father had a problem with anger. And it was like, well, I'm doomed. Okay, but we're not doomed because God helped me through that. I'm just saying.
Yeah. No,
And I don't know how all that fits into it.
Well, and that is an excellent summary of where Ecclesiastes pictures us, right? So Ecclesiastes places us right there in the muddle of our fallibility and our finitude and our realization, a realization that all of us encounter from time to time, that this thing that I've been working on so hard, nobody's even going to remember it a week from now. Or if it's brilliant, they're not going to remember it 10 years from now or 20 years from now. It's going to be gone, right? And so we all are, and that's why, I mentioned the word futility a while ago. It is possible. Lots of people have read Ecclesiastes as if it were saying that everything's futile. It's not. What it's saying is sometimes it feels to us like everything's futile. We observe the way the world is. We encounter questions and issues about the worth, the value of the day-to-day work that we engage with, and we puzzle over it, and we're frustrated, and we're scared. And Ecclesiastes says, yes, it's like that. It gives us a realistic, yeah, you're right. That's how we feel it. That's how we experience it. And God is sovereign, and here's how you live with that. So that's what the book is about. It's yes. So we feel the pressure of the past. We feel the inescapability of the cycles of life. And the book says, yeah, that's real. So it dignifies our feelings, right? It says, yes, that's real. But that's not the whole story. The whole story includes God's providence, God's care, and your work, though it is temporary. We admit that. Your work nevertheless pleases God. And the things that are a part of your life are legitimate to enjoy. Right? The legitimate things, right? Not sin. But the book says, hey, It's okay to enjoy good food, for example, right? It's okay to look at something and appreciate its beauty, even though it's temporary, right? So all of these are features of the book. And so I think you're exactly on target. So Kelly, did you have something a minute ago?
You have said just now some of the things that I was going to say, but I think about myself at this age and feeling panicked by, I have to make each day count,
Right.
you know, and again, when my children were little, that common occurrence in the grocery store of, oh, enjoy them, these days go so fast, that it's easy to feel panicked.
Yeah.
But we don't have to feel panicked.
We don't have to feel panicked, yeah. Yeah.
God's providence is so good, and His presence with us in each moment removes that panic feeling.
Yeah, yeah, that's good. Anyone else?
Yeah, Bill, I'm reading Kelly Kapich's book, The Only Human.
Yeah.
And one of the things I get out of that is we are unwilling to accept the fact that we are only creatures. And we want to be able to accomplish more, be more
Yeah.
than we're capable.
Yeah.
And so life gets frustrating because we are unwilling to accept that we are only creatures.
Right.
We're limited. Which I think Ecclesiastes is just a point. You know, don't think that you're going to be some great, you know, life has its limitations.
Right. Yeah. So the conversation nudges me a little bit to go ahead and mention an example that I was going to use a little bit later. When I'm in my work at the college, I'm not infrequently involved in the hiring of a new faculty member. And just to give you a little background, I'll try to not monologue, but nearly every person in the United States who gets a PhD, the doctoral degree that you need to teach at the college level, nearly everyone who gets one of those in the US gets it at a Research One institution, so a major university. And at those universities, it's very typical for the faculty in the graduate programs to suggest that what their students need to aim at in a career is to publish a lot, right? That's the short version, like publish 4 or 5 books, become well-known in the field, become influential, right? And of course that then reflects well on the Research One institution. The reality is that maybe 1% of the people who go through a program like that, all of them go through and are taught to expect that. That's what their career is supposed to look like. Maybe 1% of them actually have a career like that. The rest teach at a small college somewhere and are happy if they can publish a few articles and, right? So there's a big discrepancy between expectations and realization of those expectations, all right? So whenever we're involved in interviewing applicants for a position on faculty at Covenant, and I have the opportunity, I talk through that with the person, and I say, listen, your legacy will not be the 5 books that you write or the 10 books that you write. That's not going to be your legacy. Your legacy will be that perhaps 30 years from now, there will be a student who makes a choice because of something he or she heard in your class. They won't remember your name. They might not even remember that it was that particular class, but something will stick, and God will know that there's a continuity there, that there was something that you said that was useful, and God will be the one that remembers, and that'll be your legacy. Your legacy will not be the 5 books, right? And it's important to me, just out of reality check purposes, to say that to potential hires. But that's kind of the point of the book of Ecclesiastes. You know, let's keep it in perspective, keep in perspective what your calling is, and recognize, but I don't say that to be depressing, right? Recognize that that's a good legacy. It is good to be remembered by God, right? And that's the way that Ecclesiastes directs us. Did that make sense? Did you track with me on that? Okay. Anything else? Okay, so let's move a little further here. I'm nearly at the bottom of my first sheet, so that's pretty good. Yeah, Ace is impressed. So the title Koheleth, that's the Hebrew word. That's the name of this book. It means convener. It means someone who calls a gathering together, right? And so our English word Ecclesiastes is from the Latin translation of that Hebrew word, and you may remember that the church is called that because we're a group that's called together. All right, so it points to a group that's called together, and they're called together to hear a talk. And I suggested a while ago that this is a talk. So the title Koheleth means convener, one who calls an assembly together, and the book generally has the form of a public lecture presented to a group of people who've been called together so that the convener can address them. Although the book presents us with this label as a sort of pen name for the author, there's a strong tradition and good evidence for believing that the book was written by Solomon. Dennis has talked about that in the sermon series that he's doing in Ecclesiastes. But since, under the guidance of the Holy Spirit, the author used a pen name, I want to ask why. And at least some of the time, I want to lean into that authorial choice. So usually I'll refer to the book by its title, Ecclesiastes, or I may sometimes use the word Koheleth, to sort of maintain that place where Solomon appears to put himself in terms of the discussion. I don't know how much difference that'll make actually going through, but I'm explaining I'll just usually say Ecclesiastes. So. All right. Well, I said it when we started that part of what I need to do today is to try to talk a little bit about wisdom literature, and so I want to try to give a fairly brief characterization of wisdom literature. I am on the second sheet now, so turn the corner, flip the page. It will help us understand wisdom literature if we contrast it with law. Law, in particular, talks about, we're talking about the 5 books of Moses, the codification of what God wanted for his people. So law aims at what things should be like. Law aims at what things should be like. It is social and political and principial. It gives us clear statements of the way things ought to be. It helps us understand the permanent character of God. God is and will be as he is, right? So the permanent character of God. The law offers clarity, certainty, and definiteness. Wisdom literature, on the other hand, expresses what the world is like in human experience, under the sun, as Koheleth puts it. Wisdom literature is personal, practical, psychological, and poetic. It is, in a sense, less precise than law, but more concrete, less intellectual and more emotional, less definite and more aware of our finitude, fallibility, and temporality. Law and wisdom inform each other dialogically. That is, in a dialogue, like in a conversation with each other, some give and take, right? In a kind of conversational negotiation with each other, suited to our location in time, and in a sense, in that space between earth and heaven, as citizens of both for the time being, okay? Did that make sense? Okay. So what should we expect to find in Ecclesiastes? Its theme, as I understand it, can be stated this way. So I'm getting ready to say something that's kind of key. So I want to make sure you're still awake, right? So its theme, as I understand it, can be stated this way. Since everything under the sun is temporary, notice the sense there. No, it is. It's temporary, right? Since everything under the sun is temporary, what good is it to work diligently? Why should we keep caring? Why should we keep trying? Okay? That's the question. That's the question of the book. If we treat this question carefully, we can avoid hearing the book as too cynical or skeptical. It's not a question that directs us to cynicism or skepticism or doubt or fear or, self-flagellation. Doesn't do any of those things. If we treat this question carefully, we can avoid hearing the book as too cynical or skeptical, recognizing instead that it affirms God's sovereign goodness, that it calls on us to live our lives faithfully and responsibly, that it regards human work and culture as valuable even though the products of our work are temporary, so that we should neither despair nor stop working. In addition, the book affirms legitimate joy and enjoyment of things in this life, while admitting their limits in a finite, fallen, temporary world. This theme comes to expression in several discernible purposes for the book. I'm just going to run through the list. You can think of things you might want to add. But the theme comes to expression in several purposes. To affirm the importance of wisdom. To acknowledge the temporariness of earthly work and accomplishments, impermanence. To acknowledge earthly sufferings and injustices. Yeah, we got those. To declare God's eternality and justice. To emphasize that human beings are imperfect, but also responsible. To identify what is good under our current circumstances. The qualified goods that we encounter in this life. To encourage the pursuit of truth, both declared, that is what we call special revelation, and discovered, that is general revelation. To endorse hard work and legitimate joy or enjoyment. To lament oppression. And we may discover others. That's my list, but we may discover others as we continue through the book. Just about to the point where we're going to read that first bit, that first passage, and really kind of two other things that I want to say before we do that. So you've noticed this already, but there are two refrains that keep the main themes in front of us as we read. Two refrains. One is breath of breath, usually translated vanity of vanities. Vanity of vanities, all is vanity, right? By the way, that construction, the way that's put together grammatically, vanity of vanities, that's a Hebrew way of saying the most vain, or the most, in the way that I'm talking about it, breathy, right? the breathiest of breaths, right? And we have applied to Jesus in the New Testament, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. It's a Hebrew structure that means the kingliest of kings, right? He's the most kingly. He's the most lordly, right? So that's what that puts together. And the idea here is to emphasize. It's what's called the superlative. It's to emphasize. So breath of breath. So that's the first refrain. Breath of breath, traditionally translated vanity of vanities. This is a reminder that everything in our temporal worldly experience is temporary. Kind of the key point. All right? And then the second refrain is under the sun. That one occurs 29 times in the book, along with under the skies, which occurs 3 times. So the idea comes up repeatedly. And this is a reminder that our human perspective on things is limited. There is a perspective from elsewhere, right? What we see is in worldly conditions, under the sun. But it is God's good purpose for us to work within our limits. Life under the sun is marred by sin, but also upheld by blessing. Right? So those two refrains, watch for them. Vanity of vanities, or breath of breath, and under the sun. Any questions there? All right, so let's look at the opening section of Ecclesiastes. We'll read Ecclesiastes 1, verses 1 through 12. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. Vanity of vanities, or breath of breath, says the preacher, all is breath, all is vanity. What does man gain by all the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes, and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. The sun rises, and the sun goes down, and hastens to the place where it rises. The wind blows to the south and goes around to the north. Around and around goes the wind, and on its circuits the wind returns. All streams run to the sea, but the sea is not full. To the place where the streams flow, there they flow again. All things are full of weariness. A man cannot utter it. The eye is not satisfied with seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. What has been is what will be. And what has been done is what will be done. And there is nothing new under the sun. Is there a thing of which it is said, see, this is new? Nah. I put that in. I added that. It has been already in the ages before us. There is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel in Jerusalem. Right. So I hope that the preparatory work that we've done, as I've tried to point out some things to you in advance, helped you track with what was going on in that passage. Let me suggest kind of what the structure of the passage is, and then I'm going to ask you what you notice. So, first verse is an introduction. The 12th verse sort of closes off a frame by identifying the speaker. And then in between those, in verse 2, we have the statement of the theme. Vanity of vanities, or breath of breath, all is breath. And then in verse 3, we have the governing question, the question that the book aims at. And we're not going to talk about the answer today, but it's going to come, okay? Just so encourage yourself with that. But the question, what does man gain? What's it worth? Why keep up with things? Why keep going? That's the question, all right? When everything appears to be a breath, all right? And then verses 4 through 11 just tell us what it's like to be human. It's an explanation, a description of the human condition. Reasons, these are the reasons that we have as human beings, the experiential reasons we have for asking that question. Why should I keep going? Nothing ever changes. Everything repeats itself. It's all, why should we keep going? How should we think about this? And that would be a place maybe for you to jump in with examples if you thought of some. This is where I was going to tell you my example about what I talk with new faculty about, right? And I'm confident that that across the room there are other examples. So that's what this first passage. That's what this opening passage does. It sets us up for the rest of the book. It doesn't answer the question yet. I've suggested some ways that it might go, but that's where we wanted to get for today. So what do you notice in this opening passage in the little bit of time that we have left? Where does it connect with your experience?
Season of parents and teenagers, it is a comfort to recognize like this isn't anything new. I feel like we're in a season of extremes at times, like high highs and then the world is falling apart, you know.
Yeah.
And our daughter Catherine, who's a sophomore, in her English lit class this last semester studied Ecclesiastes, and it's been interesting between the pulpit and this and that, like having these rich conversations with our kids about, you know, God's purpose under the sun and what He is laying out in their lives and the pursuit of their current season of being in school and learning and getting to understand gifts that He's given them and explore those. And will that be something you want to pursue later in life? So it's a sweet time, and also at times a frustrating time, like walking with our kids. And I think it's been a good reminder. Ecclesiastes is one of Albert's favorite books to study, but a good reminder to us as parents, like as we go through different seasons with our own kids, just God's faithfulness.
Yeah. Lois, you had something like that?
Well, I was going to just share this, and I've shared with other people. When Doug was in medical school, I was helping with the sorority. And just to make it short, the house mother and I were both Christians, and we prayed for the girls. Well, fast forward 25 years later, I get a phone call one day, and one of the girls in the house, who I could not remember her name nor her face, calls me, finds me somehow in Biloxi, Mississippi, to invite me to a reunion, but proceeds to tell me that because of me and my example at the time, that she had become a believer after 3 marriages, had finally accepted the Lord and had a Christian husband. And I'm like crying because I'm going, I don't even remember what she looks like. I don't even know. And I was thinking about what you were saying, that God used that time that I'd forgotten about.
Yeah.
Because Josephine, the house mom, and I, we were about living our lives. And I had Albert during that time. And those girls, as unbelievers, watched me, how I accepted him. They had a shower for me, for him. But it's God always that does the work. So what seems few and hard at the time, God uses all this time for His gain and His glory, because that's what He's about. So, you know, we can forget when it talks about not remembering, because I could not, until I saw that gal at the reunion, I couldn't remember what she looked like. I felt like an idiot, but I just didn't, you know.
Yeah.
But God did,
Yeah.
and God loved her, and God did the work. And it just made me see how important it was to plant seeds and live our lives as futile as they can be, as tiring as we get.
Yeah.
Because even raising like our children, we get so weary. But it says, do not be weary, and you know, your rewards later. I mean, I think it's as mundane as that.
Yeah.
You know, that we persevere through times.
Yeah. If there's any book in the Bible that's mundane, it's this one. Right. It's about what it is to live here and now. Right.
Just thinking about even the insights of the world that points to the reality of what we've been talking about. Social science, the research will show that there's a correlation between happiness and satisfaction at a certain point of earning. It's around $75,000. At that point, earning more does not make you any happier, any more satisfied, and so we see that common grace insight being demonstrated. But you can look back in history at these attempts of the pharaohs. I mean, the whole idea of mummification was trying to hold on and being buried with all of your riches. How can I hold on to these things? How can I erect monuments that'll outlast me? But part of what you're saying about how do I keep my legacy alive, and it's just, you can understand the relationship why desperation and the concept of meaningless grows the more I try to grasp something that is vapor, try to build something on vapor. There's a helplessness that you begin to, it can be derived from behavior in this way. And so I think just, and I know you're going to what the answer is next week, but I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Anyone else?
I think the older you get, the more real Ecclesiastes becomes.
Yeah, I was thinking about that 70 years, and I'm 62 now, so.
Well, I'm 10 years beyond that. It really, the other thing, was watching some coverage about the quote-unquote revival, what happened in Ashbury. And they were interviewing one of the students there. And part of what she said involved, after Dennis' sermon last Sunday, part of what she said was there is a sense of eternity here. And that really struck me.
Yeah. The eternity in their hearts that Ecclesiastes talks about. And that's the solution. That's the point of reference for our temporality, as the book emphasizes it. Yeah, that's good. Well, we're at the end of our time. Thanks for being here. Let me close us in prayer. Father, thank you for your word. We pray that you would open our hearts and minds to receive those things that you would have us to see and notice and feel and understand. Grant us wisdom, we pray. In Jesus' name, amen.